Hey everyone, this is Mr. Silbaugh here. This is my take on Unit 9, Lesson 5. So in the last lesson, we talked about using validators and previewing your code to make sure that it works and everything that you do in a GUI editor matches what you need to accomplish. So always make sure you validate your code if you're using a GUI editor. Remember, GUI editors are not always reliable in generating the code. They can generate it, but it may not always be correct. Make sure your code matches the correct standards you're using. You don't want to change. It's been a recurring theme throughout this entire process with the units. And always preview your code while using a GUI editor so you have a look and see what it's going to look like on all of the different internet browsers. So the last thing in web development, and you probably saw this coming, was website publishing. Once you're done with your website, you've created it, you've either put all the code into it or you've done a GUI editor, you can actually go ahead and publish your content to the internet. So this is the last step, and you have to publish your content to the web. It just doesn't show up there. You actually have to put it on the internet. You can publish in several ways. Most GUI HTML editors will provide a publish feature that allows you to publish your pages to a designated web host. That's what's going to hold your website. You actually have to have space on the internet to publish your website. So we'll talk a little bit about that here. You can also use what's called a file transfer protocol. This is a FTP, and it's a protocol that transfers files between computers. So thinking back to the beginning of our web design units, like this was in Unit 2, whenever you started saving your web pages, remember I always had you save them as .html. You got to save it as .html, .html, okay? You may remember me continuously telling you to do that, and there's a reason for that. When you make a website, each part of a web page is a file, okay? So when you have those files saved, you group them together. And when you group them together, that's what makes your website. So a website is just a series of pages or documents that are written in HTML. And then you would put those all together in one single folder, and then you would put that folder on an FTP if you're transferring it. So that folder would go across and be transferred to another computer. FileZilla and Ipswitch are two popular FTPs. So FTPs, what are they? Most often they're used to transfer files between two computers or a server and a computer. What you're doing is you're essentially putting all of the files for your website together, and then you're going to transfer them over, and they're stored on a server so that when people access the web address that you give them for your website, that's where they're actually accessing that server. It requires an FTP client to send the files and an FTP server to receive them. You can also transfer to an HTTP server, provided that that HTTP server has an FTP already running. And before you transfer, you need to decide where your site will be hosted. So it's not enough to say, oh, I'm going to make this website www.whatever.com, and people are going to go there, and I'm just going to post everything there. It's not how it works. If you don't use like a GUI editor to publish your pages, you have to use an FTP to transfer all of your pages to the server that's holding your web address. It does take a little bit of practice, and it is a little bit tricky. We are not going to do FTPs. It's actually an optional activity in this unit. However, if you did advanced web design, you would definitely explore FTPs more in depth. So one of the things that the text mentions is that to publish to a test web server. Professional developers, as they move forward in their career, they will publish their final versions to a test web server before they actually move them to an actual server. This allows them that they can verify the web server can process any of the CGI and database access requests. Um, you can also locate and repair any dead links, and it allows members of the team and the stakeholders to preview their site. Essentially, this is done so that you can test your website before you actually publish and make it live. So it's a neat little way for you to understand how your website works and looks before you actually put it online. Test server configuration. So when you're setting up your test server, if you choose to do this option, it must be identical to the production server. That makes common sense. You need to have the same operating system, the same type and version of the web server software, and the same CGI interpreter software. Essentially, what the text is telling you to do is to have everything the same setup you'd use to create your website be the same as the server that's going to host your website as well. Publishing with FileZilla. So FileZilla is one of the more popular ones for FTPs, as I talked about. Some GUIs don't have a publishing feature, so we would use FileZilla. It's free, but it is rather tricky. I have firsthand experience using it. Back when I was doing web design classes in college, we had to actually use FileZilla to transfer and publish our web project online. So you need to know what you're doing, and there's a lot of step-by-step instructions. There's passwords required because you're going to be protecting your server, and so it's rather tricky to do so. I don't necessarily recommend it for people who are just beginning web design because it can get very tricky and very complicated very easily. They do provide instructions for you, but you do need to have some technical background and some technical knowledge in order to do this successfully. But that's why there's other options. If it becomes complicated, you can purchase server space from your internet service provider, or you can do a cloud service provider. Now, naturally, those are going to cost you. So if you do go that option, you need to consider that cost into building your website. Nowadays, it's much more easier just to buy the space and have the company that does the cloud hosting just do it for you. It's a lot easier than you trying to do it on your own. So I recommend purchasing it. If it's going to be worth the cost to host it, you might as well just have someone host it for you. So in summary, once your pages are done, you need to post them to the internet. Some GUIs will have a publishing feature built in, others will not. If they do not, you use what's called a file transfer protocol to transfer your pages to the server that's going to host your website. All right, that's going to do it for this lesson.